Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. We are now in season 4 with over 1,300 videos which are being viewed and heard around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very interesting entrepreneur from India, Mr. Mishal Pardiwala. Mishal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Garg. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Mishal is the co-founder of TreeWear, which is the personal care essentials brand. He's also the co-founder of Simply Native Low Waste Shop. So, Mishal, let me start by asking you, you say that instead of focusing solely on profits, you are trying to make a difference to the planet we currently reside on. Help me understand this and give me one or two examples.
Yeah, sure. So basically, just to give you like a kind of a insight into what we do and why we do it. Basically, my brother and I used to work in completely different professions prior to starting our company TreeWear, which is focused on the environment. And we got to a point where we realized that as we progressed in what we were trying to achieve, which was to create something that people needed, but was also a more environmentally friendly option. We realized that there's certain compromises that you have to make along the way to achieve these things. It kind of works on the side of keeping the business running versus also achieving the true goal that we had in mind. So for us, thankfully, we do have the support of our parents and our family as well, which has helped us take those steps without too much hesitation, and has allowed us to focus more on the passion side of what we do rather than purely the profit. So that's what you mentioned earlier. And an example of that is like our deodorant, I would say. Like it's a more specific example, but it's a good one because with that, we were initially struggling because we had a good formulation in mind, but we were struggling with the packaging aspect of it. So, we were in two minds about whether we should launch the product and, like kind of compromise a little bit on the packaging to kind of give people a slightly better product. Now, most of the time, this is a very viable way to move forward, where you do make those slight compromises and, achieve what you have set out to, but, with a few slight adjustments so that you can actually get it out there. So in our case, what we actually did was we took some time to actually develop the packaging that we now put the deodorants in before launching it. So we took that little bit of time and effort to make sure that we hit a minimum kind of criteria for our product before we actually launched it. So as we were selling t-shirts at the time and planting a tree for each t-shirt, we, instead of launching our other products directly, we really took the time and effort to properly develop them, to develop solutions within India for the same, because you get a lot of this packaging that comes in from China as well. And then it's just all imported and said, so we checked that option out as well. And what we eventually did was we worked with someone locally, who had some of the main machinery in place. But, we kind of developed the right sizes and adjustments to what they had already to fit our needs, and then developed a packaging for our deodorants that's actually mostly plastic free, minus an inner lining to keep the deodorant product from coming out. So that was something that we found challenging, but necessary at the same time, because, again, there are certain levels of compromise that we're making, but we try to cut that down to a minimum and set ourselves a bar that's pretty high in that regard, so that we can actually achieve it in a way that's aligned with our initial vision of it. Honestly, our brand has been created to try to actually have an environmental impact. So we try to keep that as our first focus. And, like with the kind of passion and creativity that we're putting into these processes, we hope that the result also kind of, yields in a similar fashion and provides people with an actual environmentally friendly product. When, we kind of take the time and effort and forego that cost of that to be able to create a product that's environmentally friendly. So the deodorants are a good example.
Fascinating. So now coming to TreeWear, which is your primary brand. You said you and your brother were in completely different industries. What
Yeah.
made you give up all that, uh, steady cash flow, et cetera, to start off on your own with a socially conscious brand like TreeWear?
So it definitely was a bit of a risk at the time because we did this almost 6 to 7 years ago. We started our
Mhm.
brand, and back then it was even less heard of. The environmental awareness was at a slightly lower level than it is now. People
Mm,
weren't as actively part of it as even consumers, you know. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but there was a couple of things that made us take this step forward. One is, like I mentioned earlier, we have had the support of our family, which has been a really big boon. I think not many people have that, and we really do appreciate that. That like our parents also understood the vision that we had and supported us in the sense that more emotionally and like life support because
mhm,
making a shift from a steady profession to something where we're kind of going out on a limb and creating our own products and trying to
mm,
sell and market them is quite a challenge, you know. So they were supportive, which really helped us take that decision. But the reason that we wanted to do it was because we could clearly see the kind of environmental degradation that was happening around us. You know, we've been born in Mumbai.
mm,
I studied here for um, till high school. I did end up going to boarding school in Ooty and a few other places. So having that exposure to other places and having that initial stint in Mumbai and then coming back, we could reassess the situation in some sense. And
mm,
we realized that there is a lot of change that had happened, environmentally, sure, but in terms of even the kind of waste that was being produced, how it
mm,
was being managed, we kind of started thinking more and looking more into that and trying to
mm,
understand those systems. And that's when we realized we really needed to make some kind of a change. So we took the time to transition, though. It was like a few steps that we took to really, like benchmark that if we get to this point,
mm,
within our journey,
mm,
then we move to the next one. And so we kind of kept doing that for the
mm,
first few years. It was a lot of like on ground work and a lot of recce's for different things since we were making t-shirts. So the productions to make sure that everything was being done ethically, that
mm,
the material was being sourced ethically. So we put the time and effort into that. We gave ourselves a year to really like put the concept together and get the product out there.
mm,
And so it was essentially, it was fueled by what we saw in terms of environmental change, but it
mhm,
was assisted by the support that we had around us.
Okay. And when you look at a brand like Treewear, what have been some of your challenges as you have taken the message out about your brand?
So there have been a range of challenges, and I think that's changed over time as well. So I think initially our main challenge was the environmental awareness aspect,
Mm,
to bring that awareness to other people, to let them know that, okay, look, it's maybe not as comfortable as it was maybe a decade or two ago in terms of how we interact with the planet and the kind of effect that we're having.
mm,
So initially, when we started, it was more about that, and we spread that awareness through the name Treewear and also through the concept of planting a tree for each T-shirt that we sold.
mm,
So that was something that wasn't novel worldwide, but within India, I think we were one of the
yeah,
first brands to do that.
yeah. Mm,
And I think that was a clear association because for us, like a symbol of nature, trees stand as a symbol of nature. So
mm,
we try to use that as like a way to communicate with people, but it was quite challenging because
mm,
that awareness was still increasing slightly then, but it wasn't at that point where we were like 100% confident that, okay, look,
mm,
people are starting to join this movement. But
mm,
slowly that changed. It became less of a challenge. Now people are a lot more aware, thankfully.
mm,
And now we face slightly different issues. Now we have brands that I guess there's this term called greenwashing, where it's like people claim to have a certain environmental impact or lack thereof.
mm,
But when you look deeper into the functioning of certain brands or companies, there are some gaps that they've kind of just filled very like generally by using certain terms or blanket statements,
Mm-hmm.
which when you're a new consumer or a consumer that's new to environmental awareness, it wouldn't make that much of an impact initially. It would seem like really great on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
but as you do more research, you'll find out that some of these systems are a little bit unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been trying to, set ourselves apart by just being genuine in what we do. And also, honestly, we're not the kind of people to try to call out brands and just be like, this is
Sure.
greenwashing. I don't
Sure.
want to impact anyone else's thing like that.
Absolutely.
But it is a challenge at the same time because you do see that, like when we ask questions about certain companies, then we're left with those questions still. And I think that's just because we've looked at it from the angle of working in this industry and we
Mm-hmm.
realize some of the actual practicalities. But yeah, that is something because a lot of brands that are a little bit larger than us or a lot larger than us have a lot more capital, are maybe not working in the best way, but still using terms that would convince buyers that they are making a larger environmental impact than they are. So
Interesting.
sometimes that becomes a bit of an issue, and it's hard to counteract because, like I said, we don't want to take the negative route where we're like, like telling people that they're not doing the right thing or not doing exactly as they're saying, because our approach is to try to bring in more positivity to the situation. So yeah, those are challenges, but our approach towards that is to stay on the path that we are and continue telling people about what we do,
Mm.
and also improving our own products and services as much as we can, to keep ourselves like in the game. And really, if someone does become a part of our brand, like by being a customer, I think they really do appreciate the fact that we've looked at many aspects of it. There are still a few aspects which we can't really change. Like if we use glass bottles with pumps, the pumps still contain plastic because
Mm.
that's how they're made worldwide. There's
Right.
no other source for that. So
Correct.
those few things we're trying to work around, and we do give it thought every now and then. But
Mm.
yeah, our aim is to try to improve by several degrees for our products as we keep moving forward.
How
So
wonderful. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
those are challenges, and that's how we try to face
How
them.
wonderful. And one of the things that, as you said very rightly, there is much greater environment awareness amongst the people. Certainly amongst the younger people, it's very, very high. But as someone who's working with so many different age groups of people, what can the average human being do on a daily basis to protect our environment?
So there's many things because I've been trying to think through this a lot.
Mm.
So it's for a long time now, and there are different ways to approach the situation.
Mhm.
But I would say there's two main facets that people can currently employ, or two main things that they can do in their life to really try to make that difference.
Mhm.
One is to, well, if they're already aware of the situation,
Mhm.
then there's two ways to do it. One is to through policy changes
Mhm.
and like voting, I guess, for the right people. So it's more from the idea of making a change on a large spectrum through the choices we make and whom we pick as our essentially people who represent us in government, right?
Correct.
So if there's someone locally who's actually doing great work for the environment, it's they're supporting them through your vote makes a big difference. So I
Mm.
think because that would lead to larger policy changes,
Mm.
which means that it would have a much larger impact than just an individual. So that's
Mm.
really important.
Mm.
But secondly, as an individual, also the spending power that you have, right? That's also a really big deal because if what you normally use your money towards, if you work towards putting that towards a slightly more environmentally friendly option, it
Mm.
helps build that industry and allows that industry to keep evolving in a way that it improves, the eventual outcome and how much of an impact it has on the
Mm.
environment. So
Mm.
I would say that your vote and your wallet are really important ways to make that difference as an individual.
Mhm.
And of course, even in your daily life, if you're a lot of your activities like composting or segregation of waste,
Mm.
just using resources a little bit more mindfully.
Mm.
I think those are all things that we can do on an individual level. But honestly, the more I've looked at it, I feel like, yeah, it needs to be a collective change. It's these small things done by a lot of people can make that difference.
Mm.
And also individuals have that slightly more power extended out through these two options of how you vote and how you spend your money. So I think it's
Interesting.
really important to consider that as an individual, and yeah, consider the choices that you're having and where you're putting in your hard-earned time and effort through the
Mhm.
money that you earn, and
Mm.
making those choices correctly.
Terrific, terrific. Michelle, now let's move to your next venture, which is Simply Native Low Waste Shop.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this and what was your motivation to start this one?
Okay, so this was it actually worked out really well, even with Unison. I mean, in regards to Unison with TreeWear. So around the time of COVID, my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but we were like quite close to being married, you could say.
Mhm.
We moved to well, didn't move exactly. We went to Alibag because we have a small house there,
Mhm.
farmhouse, and at the time, there was some cyclonic weather that we actually wanted to make sure that everything was all right, at home. So we made the move over there, and then it wasn't so easy to come back because there was a lot of restrictions of travel at that point in time.
Mm. Mm.
So we ended up staying in Alibag, and honestly, we've been living there till now. I'm in Mumbai right now, but we actively live in Alibag for a couple of reasons. It's a much more natural setting, so like it's just a lot more conducive to the mind and the body for us.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so since we started living there, we realized that it's such an like there is so much natural beauty to still preserve
Mm.
that we started my wife and I decided that we wanted to do something to kind of build into the community and also kind of work towards, again, environmental awareness amongst people locally.
Mhm.
So as we stayed in Alibag for a while, we realized that with the brands that we already have, which is Treewear, and my wife actually makes kombucha. So with her kombucha, which is under the Simply Native brand as well,
Mhm.
we decided that we'd open a shop to showcase some of these products as well as other brands doing really good work in a similar fashion.
Mhm.
So we started a Simply Native Low Waste Shop for that reason, is to
Mhm.
basically give people the opportunity to buy products without having all the excess plastic waste that comes with it, especially the one-time plastic, because that
Mm.
we realize is one of the harder things to be able to process,
Mm.
as waste.
Mm.
Technically. So a lot of the other things you can recycle. There's a lot of value that Raddiwalas get from it, so they're happy to collect it. But one-time plastic is something that even they hesitate to pick up because they don't have any use for per se.
Mm.
So we
Mm.
decided that since there is this problem and since there is so much rampant use of one-time plastics still, we decided that we try to create a shop with a concept where it's like a kirana store, but just, like taken back like 40 or 50 years where, plastic wasn't as common a concept. And we've tried to just employ those techniques to allow people to buy their goods on a daily basis, all their daily essentials
Mm.
without plastic.
Interesting. Interesting. And you're also speaking about refillable containers. How has the reaction in a high-end community like Alibag been to refillable containers?
So the reaction has been really positive in the sense that the people who have come into our shop,
Mm.
have understood the fact that there is this option available to them, are quite enthused by it because they, like you said, when you say high-end consumers, you also, like there's the aspect of them being fairly well or like fairly aware of the environmental problems that exist today.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
having to cross that barrier of explaining to them exactly why we're doing this and the kind of impact that it's having
Mm.
isn't as necessary because they're pretty much aware of it. So
Mhm.
it's been a pretty good transition, for an easy transition for a lot of people,
Mm.
because they come in and they see that we've got home cleaning liquids that you can refill, we've got food items that you can refill, and it's really great and positive to see because now we have people either who send somebody in to collect stuff or come in themselves mostly because they just like enjoy the experience with
Mm.
their own glass jars, with their own like old PET bottles to come and refill their products.
Mm.
So it's kind of like becoming more of a norm. We've only been there for, I mean, we've only run the shop now for about 5 months,
Hmm.
but we have a lot of support and many members of the community who come to us on a bi-weekly basis, perhaps, to come and refill their goods. So it's really nice to see every time someone starts coming in with their a bag full of empty jars. It's a really like that's where we feel happy, because we know
Fantastic.
that okay, that's where the impact is now taking
Mm.
place. You can actually tangibly see that happen. So we've had a really good response, and it's been like so great to have such positive support from the community, and we're hoping to build that even more. So as people become more and more aware, it's actually a great thing, because once someone comes to our shop and does the refill thing, they share that information with others on a casual basis, and then
Mm.
those people that they speak with also, like are enthused by the movement, they come by. So we've had a fair bit of growth, and it's been going pretty well so far.
Mm. Wonderful. So, Michelle, I have time for one more question.
Sure.
And this question is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation.
Yeah.
What would you say, given the amount of knowledge you have about the environment and the fact that you have built, two amazing brands like TreeWear and Simply Native, what would you say are three lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation and from your knowledge?
Okay, so I'll keep my aspects of knowledge kind of more general rather
Sure.
than purely environment based,
Yeah.
like environmental based. For me, I think through this entire process, I realized that I guess maybe not tangible skill. I wouldn't call it particularly skill, but I guess as a way that we can use our minds, creativity
Hmm.
is a very important thing. I think that's one thing that can be applied to any stream of work,
Yeah.
whether it's banking to law to anything.
Correct.
Though just creative thinking is very important, and I think that should be applied as much as, or like wherever appropriate, as much as
Mm.
possible, because it really can break through boundaries and help create solutions, and movements that really matter, and
Mm.
can really help us progress and evolve in the right way. So I would say creativity and using that is really important. That's one thing.
Hmm.
Um, the second thing I would say is, yeah, like kind of if someone hasn't already looked into the kind of like environmental crisis that we're going through right
Hmm.
now,
Hmm.
definitely becoming more aware of that.
Yeah.
Um, Not only for personal reasons, but I feel like being an owner of a brand, uh, it's absolutely fine for individuals and people to hold us accountable
Yeah.
for what we are doing. And I feel like that should be done across the board, like really carefully consider whom you're buying from. And like if you feel like there is something that they could be doing better,
Mm.
definitely voice that to them, whether it's a brand or again a service. Like it could work across a bunch of industries. It could be like a restaurant, they are using takeaway boxes that are maybe biodegradable, and you have the opportunity to start your own compost. Just voicing that, I think, is important. So
Correct.
keeping that conversation about the environment active and open, and
Hmm.
like constantly happening, is important as well. So that's one more thing I would encourage people to do,
Okay.
and also to look at it from the positive standpoint, because I mean everyone goes through this journey. I went through it as well, earlier on, even slightly before starting a brand,
Hmm.
where sometimes you tend to approach someone in a way that's a little bit perhaps even condescending, because you're like, this, why are you throwing, garbage? Like, making an issue with that with someone, that's happened to me before.
Mm.
And, with a negative or like a forced interaction, you see that you can actually push someone away further from
Mm.
what you're hoping that, they would achieve by being aggressive about it.
Very
So,
well said.
kind of early on in the journey, I realized that it's important to keep a positive attitude about it, not to try to shame anyone or speak negatively when someone is maybe acting in a way that does not seem really like environmentally responsible,
Mm.
and to act through example, So I realized that rather than having a big
Mhm.
argument or conversation about this whole thing, Sometimes if someone throws something which isn't in the bin, simply going and picking it up in front of them and putting it in the bin and not saying anything apart from that is enough to make them think about it.
That's right.
And, it's a lot more easy for them to digest what's happened and then hopefully, start thinking within themselves and start making that change. So
Wonderful.
that's definitely a thing. Keep the conversation open, keep it positive. That's another thing. And yeah, the last thing I would say is I've learned this from making the change from a regular job to starting my own brand. Of course, it's not like the easiest thing. There's a lot of risks involved, and like it really does help to have like the support of people around you. But I would say that if you have the opportunity to work towards something you're passionate about, definitely take the chance and see if you can make something of it. Because in those cases, I think every day that I wake up, I'm not feeling like, oh, I'm waking up for another day of work or to go to office. It's part of what I do, so it's so much more natural. There's so much more energy and enthusiasm behind it. I honestly feel that since the day that I've started, and every day since then has been about that. It's been like, okay, you wake up, I know exactly what I'm after. Maybe on some days I don't achieve it as well as I should, but that's a matter of performance. But at least I know that the efforts that I'm putting and the process, the yeah energy that I'm putting into my work every day is, has a clear focus, and I'm passionate about it. And I think if anyone else also has that kind of feeling within them, to try to explore it, because it could lead to like a profound change in how you live and see things. So I would say that, yeah, if you have that passion in you and you've been thinking of something that you feel could make the change that you feel is needed around you, or around us, then try to explore it if you have the opportunity to, because it could really make a big difference.
Fantastic. Mishal, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me about TreeWear, about your amazing project in Alibag, and you're doing such amazing stuff for the environment. Thank you also for sharing with us four very interesting lessons. Creativity is important. Look at the environment and get aware of what the crisis is. Look at the positives. Don't shame people because of the environment, but look at their positives. And finally, follow your passion. On that note, thank you so much for speaking to me, and good luck to you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. And, I really appreciate the opportunity, because even in a larger sense, this helps take that message out even
Correct.
further.
Correct.
And honestly, that makes such a large impact. So thank you for the opportunity. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of this. And yeah, and I'm a big fan of what you've been doing as well, like I mentioned earlier. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.